Hello, everyone. This is Eva Nolik-Smith with YogaUOnline, and I'm very pleased to be here today with yoga therapist and author Jeff Masters. Jeff is the founder and director of the Masters Institute, which is an organization dedicated to vibrant health, wellness, and the realization of our full potential. Jeff brings a wide-ranging background to this work, including studies in yoga, mentorships in neuromuscular therapy, studies in Ayurveda, as well as studies with Marcel Vogel of Psychic Research Institute and Pandit Rajmana Triguna of the Himalaya Institute. And Jeff, I would say about your work that in an age where yoga practice and teaching mostly centers almost exclusively on the physical practice of yoga asana, you really excel in your emphasis on bringing out the modern applications of the more esoteric aspects of yogic wisdom. And I would say you really are one of the teachers today whose work is unique in you insist on bringing us to the more subtle aspects of yoga practice and wisdom. So welcome, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Eva. It's truly a pleasure, and thank you so much for those kind words.
I'm very impressed looking at your work, because I think an issue for a lot of yoga teachers is you learn about the chakra, you learn about all these fancy things, but going out and teaching that is not something you want to do, because if you don't experience the chakras, it's like not something you can authentically teach. And I think your work really, you embody, teaching these deep principles in an authentic way, and that's what's really makes you very unique as a teacher today. And just to start out, since we are in a very difficult time for a lot of people, I'm kind of curious on your perspective from a yogic standpoint of what we're going through right now as a society with the COVID pandemic and the turbulence that we experience on so many other levels of life.
I would say first and foremost, thank you for the opportunity to talk about it, to touch on it. From a yogic perspective, I would say it's really important to feel a great deal of compassion for everything that everybody is going through as a collective. Those who have been touched by this pandemic personally and directly, and those, I think we all have been touched directly in some way, but those who may have lost loved ones or lost their life, and also those who have literally lost a sense of normalcy to their everyday kind of lifestyle and potentially even livelihood. And so we, as yogis and yoginis, really, it serves us personally and our nervous system and our immune system to come back to that understanding of compassion. And not just compassion for others, but also compassion for ourselves in what we're experiencing. Panditji has this beautiful teaching that he shared, which is that we are the first recipients of our negative mind. And I've humbly added to that, we're also the first recipients of our positive practice. And so by focusing on a level of compassion for self and others, it actually bolsters and strengthens our vagus nerve. It strengthens our nervous system, which then feeds our immune system. The ambient stress and increased kind of tension around this whole pandemic experience has the quality of actually sapping intrinsic vitality, or we could even say in yoga, prana shakti, from our immune system. And that's well recorded in studies on the stress response and its impact on the immune system, and how it helps over a long period of time to debilitate us and make us more susceptible to illness. And so if we can do anything to feed that, our nervous system, to strengthen our nervous system, even in this time, it's actually an asset to staying healthy. And so the first step, in my opinion, is focusing on a level of compassion for those, and really seeing that a lot of the responses, it's a turbulent world out there right now. In people's responses to being asked to wear a mask or not wanting to wear a mask, or even to stay inside, self-isolate. There's a level of resistance to that because it is outside of the realm of what we know of as our everyday life. And in some ways, going back to that anatomy way of looking at it, it's pushing us outside of our normal state, which then causes a reaction of homeostasis or a resistance to it to come back to what we know or think we know as normal. And in some ways, we as yogis and yoginis, those who have kind of dedicated ourselves to the practice of yoga, we're uniquely equipped to be able to face that samskara coming up with pure awareness or self-study, radical self-awareness, and see what's really driving the reaction and the reactivity of the mind, which then translates into the reactivity of the body, and then use the tools that we've cultivated through the practice of yoga in order to bring about a state of peace, a state of peaceful awareness and a peaceful body. And in doing that, we literally become, in some ways, examples or lights to those around us who might be looking for more knowledge. And what do I do? How do I manage this? Why is it that you're so calm? Why is it that this doesn't seem to affect you in this way? And that's a beautiful opportunity as a yogi or a yogini to share those tools with people that need it so bad right now. The practice of yoga, to me, Satchidananda Saraswati said that it would change the world. The science of yoga would change the world. And right now, that's what the world needs more than anything, is the practice of yoga.
Right, right. And are you thinking in terms of mindfulness, asana practice? Which aspects of yoga would you feel are particularly helpful right now? Awareness of the situation from a more cosmic perspective. How would you feel, or what do you feel is the most salient aspect of practice that makes yoga so helpful during this time?
I love that question. And I would say it's going to, my students will laugh at this because they know the answer, but it's going to probably depend on the individual. In yoga, we meet the student, the individual, ourselves, where we're at in that moment. And that's the doing of no harm to, the person. And maybe it is that in that moment, the individual needs to move. They need to have that physical exertion, that engagement of the tissues in order to, maybe if they're sequestered at home in self-isolation and they haven't been able to go out and exercise or anything like that, the practice, a nice asana practice, would be beneficial to discharging some of that pent-up energy that's stuck in the body and the mind and the nervous system. And at the same time, there may be another individual whose mind is really racing and is having a hard time calming down and dealing with the events of the day. And so to be able to maybe engage a little bit of that energy physically and then bringing themselves into a calm state where they can focus inward and pay attention to those fluctuations of the mind, engaging mindfully what's going on in the mind and body, and allowing them to identify and unwind and heal or dissipate some of that would be beneficial. To me, the beauty of the practice of yoga is one of, if not the most comprehensive set of tools or practices that can help people wherever they're at with whatever they're dealing with. in this time and in this moment. So I would say, depending on the individual and what they're going through in that moment, the practice of yoga has something for them,
Right,
no matter
right.
what. So the short answer is it depends.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's beautiful and very true. Now, when we do talk about, the concept of health and staying healthy physically, emotionally, mentally, I think the one concept that's relevant in yoga is that of prana, which is loosely translated as life force. And I think one of the things that's very interesting is if you look in systems of natural medicine, like Hippocrates, he referred to life force or vital essence as the key element in health and healing. So tell us about this aspect of prana. What is this life force, and are there ways for us to cultivate prana in our daily lives and engage with it more consciously?
Yes, thank you. Again, that's a beautiful question. And in some ways, I'd say I have some answers, and in other ways, I would say it's above my pay grade to really kind of define and button down some of those questions and answers, but I'll do my best based on my personal experience and the wisdom that's been shared with me from those that I've been fortunate enough to study with. Prana, it's interesting. When I first started practicing yoga, prana was always like, it's breath. Breath is energy. Energy is breath. And prana is breath. And it took a few years because it was always this kind of high concept philosophical, and it is. Prana is this high concept philosophical term, and I really wanted a way for myself first and foremost, but then my students to be able to connect to this. And there's life force, organ energy, ki, chi, any of
Right.
these terms that, like you said, in these holistic healing modalities that have kind of embraced this concept of universal life force energy. And I always say universal truths are universal across all times and all cultures. And so you see this concept of this universal force that supports it. It moves to, through, and around all of us across all those cultures and all those times. And it is embodied. It's literally the ocean through which our consciousness comes from single pointed oneness into manifest crystallized form of the physical body, and then supports the process of the nourishment and the evolution of the physical body and our consciousness throughout the journey of life. And then once again, we kind of float back up that river, if you will, to that state of unified oneness again when we shed the body.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and I think the other thing that's fascinating about this concept is, I think, at least in Ayurveda, but I believe also it's part of yoga philosophy, the nadis, the 60,000 minute channels of the body through which prana flows. And I know that Ayurveda is very clear that the seed of disease, I mean, we mostly hear about the doshas, the dosha go out of balance, and that's the cause of disease. But really, Ayurveda is also very specific that the seed of disease lies in the nadis, when the nadis get clogged. And it's so interesting because it has a lot of parallels, obviously, with the Western concepts of all the different channels that blood and lymph and everything flows through, but then it's transcending to a much more subtle level. And it's just a fascinating concept, and I believe most of the Ayurvedic techniques focus on clearing the nadis. Is that correct?
Not being an Ayurvedic practitioner myself, I can speak to what I know, which is it's about bringing balance back into those subtle metabolic constitutions, or the doshas, as you as you said. And what a beautiful, you unpacked it very beautifully in talking about it being subtle, more subtle. And when we look at this, this journey of consciousness from this subtle realm of unified oneness into this sort of crystallized or solidified form of the human experience, the human body, you can see that in that continuum, in that spectrum, there's a layer of where the subtle energy is actually circulating, and the nadis being 700,000 to 14 to 6 to many different sources of numbers, numberless in some ways. And as it begins to crystallize more and more, it becomes the pattern upon which our normal circulatory system starts to build. And so within our normal circulatory system, we can have toxins, we can have impurities, we can have, adhesions and knots and blockages. And so that same dynamic can exist within, and I would even say starts in the subtle channels. We have that, Prana or toxin that starts to build up. And then from a doshic perspective, it's going to imbalance the element within that channel, within the physical body, which then is going to show up as an imbalance in the dosha, which then is going to seep down into the system, whether it's, respiratory or digestive, and then that manifests itself as the actual disease, the symptomatology or the disease process itself. And so being able to work with the root cause or the root seed, if you will, the subtle energy that underlies that entire solidification or crystallized process is such a powerful tool that I think Ayurveda has and is able to leverage in the disease process.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And if we think, Western medicine, okay, it's clogged blood vessels and clogged lymph, and it causes all these different issues. Then you have Chinese medicine, where it's, the meridians, the subtle flow through, the acupressure points. So is there like a level more subtle also? I presume it's like subtler and subtler and subtler and subtler until infinite, in terms of the nadis that constitute our extended body mind.
I personally believe there is. I think that when we look at the philosophy that underlies the entire practice of yoga, it basically states that this human experience, this human body, which is an island of excellence living within this ocean of life, right, is a mirror or a microcosmic representation of this greater experience of the vastness of the universe, right? And so if we look at that from, let's say our physical body has a circulatory system that the humors flow through, and oxygen and carbon dioxide are diffused and shuttled through the body. And all of this happens within this circulatory system that on a subtle level, there is a circulatory system, an energetic or a pranic circulatory system. And we see that really codified very beautifully in the form of the vayus and in the form of these nadis, these channels that exist in and around the body, the subtle realm of the body, and I believe inform the actual circulatory pathways of our capillaries, going into our arteries, going into our veins, and moving into the trunks and even our lymphatic system. We look at the immune system is informed by the subtle flows or the subtle circulation of prana shakti, then informs the gross flows of the cardiovascular system and the immune system.
Right. Yeah, and I remember Deepak Chopra, he had this nice concept of metabolizing experience, and that constituting our ability to move through life and kind of processing things or getting stuck on past trauma. So there is an element of circulation even in our mental, emotional processes. Is that how you see it?
Absolutely. And that speaks to me, that speaks to the powerful natures and tools that the healing protocol of Ayurveda has at its beck and call, because we talk about digestion and the digestive fire, and that fire feeds all other fires in the body, and it's our ability to receive, break apart, and then digest or break down and assimilate, absorb, and utilize all the experiences that come to us. And that really is kind of the quintessential definition of digestion. It doesn't just exist in the food that we eat, it also exists in the mental constructs, the concepts that come in, the emotional experiences that we have. If we have a large bolus of emotion that comes at us, and our emotional fire is not primed enough to be able to break that apart and rarefy it and break it down and then assimilate and absorb it, then it becomes almost like emotional indigestion, and we become unable to break it down, and then you could even look at it from the same perspective, that it would putrefy and become toxic, right, and create mental ama, or emotional ama. Right. I do believe that this is a concept that exists in Ayurveda as well. So.
Yeah. And how does that relate into the experience of trauma, where it's such an overwhelming experience that it's too much to process?
Absolutely. Yeah, you have that energy that comes in the form of the experience, and really, when you break it down, you can say, okay, this is a level of prana shakti that my senses are being exposed to, that they then have to take in and then process through the tools that this body has at its disposal, the nervous system and the cognitive apparatus, in order to digest that information. And if it doesn't have that spectrum or that window of tolerance in order to accept that in, then it becomes overwhelmed, and that experience becomes a source of stress, increased stress, or trauma. And then that echoes throughout the entire spectrum of the human experience, and then becomes a samskara, or an impression, a conditioning factor that then embeds itself throughout the spectrum of experience. And
very interesting. It's very interesting.
At the Masters Institute and the Masters Model, we talk about them as conditioning factors, and that there are multiple types of conditioning factors that span that experience of gross to subtle as well. And the practice of yoga is uniquely engineered to be able to work through those.
Yeah. It's very, very interesting. It reminds me of a almost traffic accident I was in, with our car sliding on an entrance ramp to a highway on ice. And nothing happened. We just kind of twirled around and very mildly hit the thing, and got out of the car. Everything was fine. But that reverberated through my whole field of experience for weeks and months after. So every time we would be driving on a snowy road, like even with half an inch of snow, I would just go into a fit of hysteria, because no, we're going to skid. And it was that was such an obvious experience, but nothing really happened. There was really nothing to be afraid of. And even in the moment when it happened, I wasn't afraid. But it still lodged itself through the whole mind body, as I guess what you call a samskara, that kind of conditions us to react in an kind of irrational way.
Absolutely. That's well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. That's a beautiful example of that occurring in your direct experience. And I'm imagining all of us probably have those moments in our lives. I remember being in my mother's old Audi, and it was during winter, and the road was slick with rain, and we spun like 2 or 3 times and then came just off the side of the road, and nobody got hurt. But you're right that in your mind, you're thinking, oh, I'm okay, nothing happened, thank goodness, everybody's fine, and there wasn't, the car coming. I'm okay. The car eventually goes on its way. But there's other levels of conscious awareness that are at work, and other layers of that spectrum of the human experience that have been impacted by that one moment, that imprint of that samskara, that then the next time you drive around that corner, you might be not even consciously thinking about what's going on, and yet the body, the physical tissues, the deep non-local and unconscious react and come up, because it's not under the purview of thinking. It's under the purview of being, and it knows that awareness is being invoked in the presence of that space, that kind of biological GPS system, if you will.
Right.
It's aware that that's happening in that moment, in that space, and so it alerts the body to be ready.
Right. Yeah.
Some really fascinating studies around the stress response and the need for visual recognition of it or not. And what they found is that people don't always have to actually be able to see the threat for the body to react to it. So it gives you this whole other level of awareness. When we say that the mind and body are one, that's what we teach at the...
Right.
More than that, it's more than just one. The mind and body are a singularity.
Right.
And and so that study is a really nice one to demonstrate that, I don't have to be thinking that I'm in danger, even unconsciously be thinking I'm in danger, in order for my tissues to actually alert, because they know.
Interesting. Yeah.
Kind of fascinating.
Yeah, and what you were describing just earlier is the whole idea of triggers, that these experiences get lodged, and then, and it's something there's been a big discussion of in the yoga community, of course, where some students just have triggers, and you really need to be sensitive to that. So
that is a really, to me, in when we teach our teacher trainings, to me, that is a crucial piece of educating new and upcoming yoga teachers, or even experienced yoga teachers that may not have been exposed to it in their teaching or their training. That each one of these areas of our gyanendriyas, or the sensory apertures, we call them sensory access points, like your eyes, ears, nose, proprioceptors, and all of that. Those are windows or doorways that all of these impressions have access to. When we experience something that is traumatic or could be traumatic, that gets imprinted not just in our mind. Oh, that was a traumatic experience. It gets imprinted across our entire experience of the human being. And so in any one moment, in a class, or in a moment in life, any one of those sensory access points could get pinged, or stepping into the trigger field, if you will, and cause the body and the mind to alert. And so it's really important, I feel, to educate teachers, educate yogis to this, and how they can create as neutral a field as possible in teaching, in order to allow for the identification and unwinding and healing of any of those triggers that might come up, and not necessarily being a cause for it, but just holding space for that samskara, that impression, that conditioning factor, to unwind and release from that channel, from that nadi.
Right. Yeah, and that is the beautiful thing, coming back to this idea of prana, and prana flowing through the nadis. Trauma essentially is a blockage in the nadis, and yoga, as you pointed out, in Ayurveda, is one of the many ways. It gives us a number of tools that helps clear those channels, which is one of the beautiful things about it. So you have a course coming up on this concept with the somewhat ambitious name, Pranic Pathways of Transformation. The subtitle, Exploring the Link Between Our Nervous System and the Nadis. So tell us about the course, Jeff, and what you're covering in it.
First of all, I'm really thankful and honored to be able to offer this through YogaU. I have a deep appreciation for the platform and the people you serve and
Thank
those who
you.
are part of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The pranic pathways of transformation. Hopefully, the content lives up to the name. That's my hope. It is pretty ambitious. The practice of yoga ultimately is about stilling or calming the fluctuations of the mind. Yoga Sutra 1.2. And so the core kind of turbinators or activators of those subtle waves of the mind are these impressions, these conditioning factors that are woven throughout our human experience. And so as we practice, or well, literally as we go through life, those channels become filled with experience. And sometimes they get blocked and sometimes they get wound up and tied up. And so if we become aware of how the practice of yoga is moving prana shakti through these channels, then we're more aware of the process of the unwinding and the discharging of these conditioning factors that then start to calm the mind. And it's many people, if you could ask anybody who's been in a class, they're in a class and all of a sudden something comes into their mind, whether it's a thought or an emotion or like an artifact, a flash of something, or many people have had these experiences in yoga classes and they're like, I wasn't even thinking about my father and all of a sudden it just popped into my mind. And pigeon pose is often the one that's it's blamed for a lot of the emotional catharsis that occurs from the releasing of the hips and all that. So that happens throughout the practice of yoga, and the reason is because we're moving prana shakti through those subtle channels, and anything that's located there. You know, we think about how much energy does it take for this physiological system? How much prana does it take for this physiological system to move through life from start to finish? And we could think of it in terms of almost like a gauge. When we practice yoga, whether it's the asana, the pranayama, the mantra, the bandhas, any of that, we're moving energy to and through the system. And it may be more energy than this part of the system is used to. And as it does that, it unwinds or unlocks some of the Shakti or some of the impressions that are located there, and they rise up through that spectrum of human experience into the nervous system, into the cognitive apparatus, and we have a recognition of it, whether it's emotionally or mentally or cognitively. And depending on what the state of our mind is in that moment dictates how that impression ultimately is resolved or not resolved. And so this course is really kind of a primer on how that works, and it gives students a really good anchor point for understanding how the subtle channels can and do correlate to the gross channels of our nervous system. So the pranic pathways of the nadis can and do connect to the gross system of our nervous system, and how as we start working through the practice of yoga, or with the practice of yoga, we start to clear those channels and affect the nervous system, which then allows us to down-regulate it, calm it, soothe it. So then the mind becomes calm and soothed. And so the brain waves, the thought patterns start to calm and soothe. And we start to find space between our thoughts, which eventually gets wider and wider and wider until we have that beautiful moment where we're just in that space of niruddha, or a cessation of the mind waves, which leads us to that beautiful space of the potential or the opportunity for self-realization.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love that description.
Thank you.
Transcending to finer and finer levels of experience. Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, Jeff, thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time to offer this wonderful course through YogaUOnline. And thanks also for joining us today for this wonderful talk. And everyone listening in, be sure to look for Jeff on our website under teachers and upcoming courses, and we'll also send out some email announcements about the course. So again, Jeff, thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you, Eva. It's been a pleasure. I really do appreciate it. Take care.
Take care. Namaste. Bye-bye.